Hi, it's Mike Stevenson here. This is the 11th video on the series of using Serverless360 Business Activity Monitoring with Azure Integration Services. So in this video, we're going to talk about the idea of using API management as a proxy. So let's imagine you've got the scenario where you've got your BAM checkpoint shapes within your logic app. You're sending telemetry to Serverless360, but what you'd like to do is actually put API management as a proxy between the logic apps and the Serverless360 BAM service. So there's a number of reasons you may choose to do this. One of them might be that you want to have some more advanced key management features. So that might mean that you want to have a number of different people consuming the service, but you don't want to let everyone talk directly to the third-party service. You want to put something in the middle so that you can just broker that and get some control over who can use it, manage the cycling of keys yourself, and do a number of things like that. There's also just a decoupling scenario that a lot of companies like, where they would just proxy any third-party service they use. So how would we be able to do that? So if we have a quick look over in Serverless360, so I've got so over here in the BAM section, I've got demo number 11. So this is a really simple transaction. We've got a couple of shapes here, exactly as we've shown in many of the demos before. We also have a logic app here where we're going to trigger it with the HTTP shape using the manual trigger. We're going to execute a start transaction. So we're going to pass the transaction name, the stage, and the business process, and then we're going to do the checkpoint. So those are the two shapes that you're going to use there. Now, what I'm going to show, I'm going to just run this first, just to show it in action and show that we're getting some data up here. So we'll just check there's only one transaction from before running. So we'll let this run, and then I'll show you what we've done to make it go through API management rather than going direct. So you can see we've got our second transactions just come through there. Everything's fine. Now, what's quite cool with we've set the connector up as a custom connector, so you can set this up yourself, and you can see you've got this in the you've got the API connection and the custom connector down here. So let's have a quick look how we've done this. So number one, we'll start with API management. So we've got an API management instance here in Azure, and what I've done is I've set up an API that basically just uses the exact same so that the swagger that you get for setting up the connector, you can also import that into Azure API management, and you can see we've got all of the things that are in the swagger get set up just like they would for when you've imported that in for logic apps. This looks exactly the same. The only things that I've really done, so number one, we've got the back end service that's pointing to your endpoint on Azure. That's been set up. So that's the one that I got out of the BAM portal. So over here, if we have a quick look, we go to the settings section. So I'm not going to show specifically this bit, but in your access keys, you've got the BAM connection details, which includes your BAM connection stuff. Now, what I'm going to do next over here is you can see, so I've got that as configured as my API backend, and then I've got my my BAM policies here. So what I can do is I can set the header, and I can set my BAM key, which I'm going to cycle in a moment or two, and that'll basically set the backend URL and the BAM key, which will configure my service to point to that specific BAM endpoint. So what I need to do next is I need to get myself an API key from API management, which is very vanilla, and I set up a subscription for it. So you can see here I've got my logic app connection. And what I would do is when I go into the Azure portal, so if I come out of API management, and in my custom connector, there's two things I need to change. So sorry, my API connection even, the wrong bits. There's 2 bits I need to change. Sorry, in the wrong bit. In the BAM connector, sorry, what I need to do is make a couple of changes. So I go and edit it, and I basically just go through and modify down here. So I've changed the host, so instead of pointing out of the box, you would have it pointing to your Serverless360 BAM instance, which you would get from the Swagger. I've changed that, so instead it's going to point to my API management instance. And then next off, I would set, so I've set the subscription key, and I've set the so here I'm setting the API parameter, and I would set the subscription key for my API management instance. So the good thing is, if you've got many different teams all using Serverless360, and you want to have, you can have some keys in Serverless360, but if you want much more granular control, you can use API management to give people the different kinds of security that you want. So you can kind of have your different teams, each with their own key. They can set their connector up in their resource group or whatever they're going to do. Maybe they're not even using logic apps, they might be using functions or some other, maybe the .NET library. You can give them all separate keys. They can all talk to your APIM instance, and then that just forwards it on, so that the policy, all it's doing is really a URL redirect onto the Serverless360 service, and you're just acting as a man in the middle that's forwarding those calls on, and you get all the features that API management offers on top of hiding the Serverless360 instance behind that. So I think if you're scaling out your BAM usage across a number of teams, this is a good thing to consider, because it just gives you an extra level of governance and control over who's using the service. And what you might do is, so I've had times where in dev test I might not always want to point to my BAM service, and I might just forward the calls into a function or something like that, so I can see a little bit of info of what's going on. But then in production I might have them forwarding on to Serverless360 BAM, and having API management in the middle just gives me a number of options that I can think about different ways of implementing it. So hopefully that's a really useful video. The key thing was, from the perspective of the logic apps, nothing changed. You just use the connectors as you would normally. The only thing changing really was in the connector. So if we go back, I'm modifying my connectors set up here to change it to point to APIM, and the other bit I would have done would have been on my API connection, where I specify the API key. I would just use the key from API management instead of the key from Serverless360. It's that simple.